A few months ago, scientists announced the San Andreas Fault is due for another major earthquake, specifically in Southern California, where there hasn't been a major quake since 1857.
The ground tore apart with a roar that seemed to echo from the very heart of the earth, splitting highways, swallowing stretches of farmland, and sending shockwaves through the densely populated communities of Southern California. The San Andreas Fault, long feared as the sleeping monster beneath the state, had broken wide open in a way that stunned both residents and officials alike. Buildings quivered, entire neighborhoods felt the ground heave beneath them, and the sheer scale of destruction brought an immediate halt to normal life across the region. It wasn't a localized tremor that Californians had grown accustomed to. It was something far greater, a rupture that carved itself into the land like a scar that would not heal. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. Governor Gavin Newsom, thrust into the center of this crisis, faced the unfolding catastrophe with the weight of millions of lives on his shoulders. He had often spoken about preparedness, climate resilience, and the challenges of governing a state perched on seismic fault lines. But now those words were tested against a reality that no simulation or briefing could fully capture. The shutdown of Southern California was not a decision born of caution. It was forced by the sheer magnitude of the disaster. Infrastructure was crippled, transportation routes were fractured, and the risk of further collapses made any movement perilous. For the governor, it was a moment of reckoning, as the world watched how California's leadership responded when one of nature's most feared forces finally unleashed its fury. The San Andreas Fault has long been the subject of both scientific study and cultural fascination, often dramatized in films, documentaries, and speculative scenarios. Yet, when the fault split open, all the theories and predictions paled in comparison to the raw, unfiltered reality of land itself breaking apart. Roads stretched and cracked, power lines snapped like twigs, and the delicate web of pipelines carrying water and gas ruptured in cascading failures. Newsom was inundated with reports from every corner of Southern California. Los Angeles, Riverside, San Bernardino, and San Diego counties all reporting chaos. The panic was not just among the people trying to survive in their homes or on the streets, but also in the offices of officials scrambling to understand how to contain the spiraling emergency. The political dimension of the event was unavoidable. Governors are tested in fires, storms, and crises, but few had ever faced a rupture of this scale in modern American history. Newsom had to project authority, but also empathy, recognizing that every word carried consequences. He could not downplay the event, nor could he promise quick relief when the very systems needed to deliver aid had been severed. Highways that connected vital cities were split apart, airport runways were cracked and rendered useless, and ports faced structural uncertainties. The shutdown order was the only rational response, yet it sent a chilling signal across the nation. Southern California, one of the world's economic and cultural powerhouses, had been forced into paralysis by the earth itself. The implications rippled outward with breathtaking speed. Southern California is not an isolated outpost, but a hub of global commerce, technology, and entertainment. The shutdown instantly disrupted supply chains that stretched across the Pacific Ocean, through ports like Los Angeles and Long Beach. Containers that once carried goods between Asia and the United States were stalled, and the silence of idle cranes mirrored the stillness imposed on freeways where cars once flowed endlessly. Newsom's panic was not only about the immediate humanitarian crisis, but also about the cascading economic shockwaves that were beginning to spread. Investors were already asking questions about stability, businesses were bracing for prolonged disruptions, and families across the nation wondered how this would affect them as shortages loomed. The governor's office became a nerve center, flooded with satellite images, seismic data, and desperate pleas from local leaders. Helicopters circled above gaping fissures in the earth, capturing footage that stunned viewers worldwide. What had once been theoretical disaster preparedness slides were now living images of destruction unfolding in real time. Newsom was forced into difficult decisions, deploying the National Guard, coordinating with federal agencies, and ordering evacuations where aftershocks threatened to bring down weakened structures. His words had to balance firmness with compassion, but the tremor in his voice betrayed the enormity of the situation. For all the composure he tried to display, the reality was clear. California's leader was in a moment of deep panic, not only for the safety of his people, but also for the future stability of his state. Communities across Southern California responded in different ways, but the unifying theme was fear mixed with resilience. Families rushed out of their homes, unsure if the ground would open again beneath them. Emergency services strained under the weight of calls that flooded every dispatch center. Hospitals operated on backup power, treating injuries from collapsing structures and panicked evacuations. Water supplies were compromised as aqueducts and reservoirs suffered structural failures, leaving cities scrambling to secure essential resources. Newsom was informed that the San Andreas rupture had caused not just visible surface splits, but also deep subterranean shifts, raising alarms about the possibility of secondary quakes along connected fault lines. The scale of risk expanded beyond what even seasoned seismologists had anticipated. The shutdown order wasn't merely about halting daily life, it was a line drawn between survival and further catastrophe. Halting movement reduced the chance of accidents on fractured roads, minimized strain on emergency responders, and allowed engineers to assess the stability of critical infrastructure. Yet the human cost of this immobilization was profound. Families were separated, communication networks faltered, and uncertainty loomed as people wondered how long the shutdown would last. Newsom knew every passing hour would test public patience, and with patience already stretched thin from years of wildfires, droughts, and other natural crises, the possibility of unrest simmered beneath the surface. The historical significance of the San Andreas Fault tearing open in such a dramatic way cannot be overstated. California has long been defined by its relationship with nature, its beauty and its dangers. The big one had been whispered about for decades, the phrase itself becoming shorthand for the ultimate seismic reckoning. Now, with the ground itself torn apart, the event was no longer a prediction, but a lived reality. Newsom found himself not only a political figure, but also a symbol of California's confrontation with its most feared natural threat. His panic, though human, was also magnified by the expectations placed upon him. Leaders are expected to rise above fear. But in moments when the earth itself betrays its inhabitants, even the most seasoned officials find their composure shaken. The event's impact on the psyche of Californians was immediate and profound. The rupture was not just a physical scar across the land, but also a psychological fracture. People began to question the safety of returning to homes perched near fault lines, and the confidence that life could carry on as normal was deeply shaken. The sound of cracking asphalt and the sight of gaping earth were burned into memory. Children clung to parents, seniors relived past disasters, and communities that had prided themselves on resilience now faced a challenge that tested their very identity. For Newsom, panic wasn't just about logistics. It was about the realization that a generation's relationship with its home state had been forever altered. The shutdown also had symbolic weight in a country already grappling with divisions and crises. Southern California, often viewed as the beating heart of innovation, culture, and forward-looking energy, had been silenced. Newsom's press briefings carried not only the burden of local responsibility, but also the attention of a nation trying to comprehend what it meant when such a crucial region was brought to its knees. The sight of freeways empty, skyscrapers trembling, and neighborhoods broken sent ripples through the American consciousness. It became clear that the San Andreas rupture was not merely a Californian crisis, it was an American one. Scientists scrambled to analyze the data streaming in from seismic monitors, but even their expertise offered little comfort. The scale of movement along the fault line was unprecedented in living memory, and while forecasts could suggest potential aftershocks, the unpredictability of tectonic shifts left officials and citizens alike in suspense. Newsom listened to briefings that carried more questions than answers. The uncertainty added to his visible panic as he realized that leadership in this moment meant guiding people through a fog of the unknown. Assurances were hollow when no one could say for certain what would happen next. The sheer physicality of the event continued to dominate the narrative. Highways that once bustled with millions of cars daily now lay in ruin. Concrete slabs misaligned by feet, not inches. Bridges sagged dangerously, some collapsing outright. Rail lines twisted out of alignment, leaving freight and passenger trains stranded. Airports grounded flights as cracks split across runways. The shutdown of Southern California was not a metaphor, but a literal grounding of one of the busiest regions in the world. Newsom's panic was rooted in the recognition that the recovery of such a vast interconnected system would not be measured in days or weeks, but in months, perhaps years. For ordinary residents, the event unfolded with terrifying immediacy. One moment they were going about their routines, and the next, they were confronted with the unimaginable, earth buckling beneath their feet. The stories poured in of families leaping from shaking homes, of commuters trapped on highways that split before their eyes, of farmers watching irrigation canals drain into gaping cracks. The human scale of suffering was immense, and Newsom's challenge was to respond to each report with urgency, while recognizing the limitations of what could be achieved in those first crucial hours. The San Andreas rupture laid bare the fragility of modern civilization when confronted with geological forces. All the technological advancements, sprawling cities, and intricate networks of commerce were instantly humbled by the simple fact that the Earth's crust is alive and restless. Newsom's panic reflected the recognition that no amount of governance could fully shield against such raw natural power, yet leadership was still demanded, if only to provide direction, comfort, and the assurance that the state would endure. The air over Southern California hung heavy with dust as the fractured ground stretched for miles, creating a jagged wound across one of the most populated landscapes in the United States. What had once been thriving city blocks and smooth freeways was now interrupted by craters, collapsed overpasses, and neighborhoods left teetering on unstable ground. The San Andreas Fault, long regarded with wary respect, had made its presence known in a way that silenced even the most skeptical voices. Governor Gavin Newsom, already overwhelmed by the weight of immediate decisions, now found himself pressed into the role of both leader and symbol, embodying the anxiety of a state whose foundations had literally shifted beneath its feet. His response was captured across television networks and streaming feeds, his eyes betraying the gravity of the disaster that had forced a complete shutdown of Southern California. In Sacramento, his command center buzzed with urgency as maps, seismic readouts, and communication logs flooded in. Yet no map or data set could soften the truth. The ground had opened, and the modern world's carefully constructed systems were not prepared for such an event. The words he delivered carried authority, but the tension in his voice revealed what residents already felt: that the situation was teetering on the edge of control. The shutdown was not just a logistical move, it was a reflection of paralysis itself. When roads are split, airports crippled, and power grids compromised, society is frozen. The millions who populate Los Angeles, San Diego, and the Inland Empire were suddenly unable to move, trade, or even connect reliably. Cell towers bent and fell, leaving neighborhoods cut off from vital communication. Emergency broadcasts reached some but not all, creating a patchwork of knowledge where rumors traveled faster than verified updates. The chaos spread not just physically, but emotionally, feeding uncertainty that rippled through households and communities. The implications of this crisis extended far beyond the physical damage. Southern California is a symbolic capital of American culture, from Hollywood studios to Silicon Valley's southern outposts, and its sudden shutdown carried shockwaves across the globe. Newsom, in his increasingly tense addresses, understood that the world was watching not just how Californians survived, but how governance itself held together in the face of nature's fury. The sight of a modern mega-region grinding to a halt challenged assumptions about resilience and control in the 21st century. The rupture brought a unique kind of fear because it exposed the unpredictability of the Earth itself. Fires, storms, and even pandemics, while devastating, followed patterns that science could track. The ground, however, had split with no warning sufficient to prevent chaos. In the aftermath of the initial rupture, smaller quakes rippled outward, shaking structures that had already been weakened. Engineers struggled to determine which buildings could stand and which were on the brink of collapse. Newsom was informed that entire stretches of the famed aqueduct system had been compromised, threatening long-term access to water for millions. The panic intensified as officials began to realize that the rupture was not just a temporary disruption, but a transformation of the very landscape. What unfolded in the days after the shutdown was a portrait of a society grappling with its fragility. Grocery stores emptied within hours as supply lines were severed. Gas stations ran dry as delivery trucks were unable to navigate destroyed highways. Hospitals sounded alarms as critical supplies dwindled, and backup generators strained under prolonged use. Newsom's communications team struggled to maintain steady messaging, but each press conference seemed to widen the gap between reassurance and the stark reality outside. The governor's shoulders visibly bore the weight of these cascading crises, and the images of his tense expressions spread across media, becoming synonymous with the moment itself. At the core of this event was the recognition that Southern California's shutdown had implications for national security. Military bases scattered across the region faced logistical challenges, their airstrips and supply chains disrupted. Federal officials pressed for immediate updates, aware that instability in California could ripple outward to affect defense readiness and international perception of American stability. Newsom found himself pulled into urgent calls with Washington not just to discuss humanitarian relief, but to address the broader implications of the fault line rupture on national infrastructure. The psychological impact on the population deepened as the hours turned into days. Families huddled in parks, parking lots, and makeshift shelters, haunted by the sight of their homes sitting crooked on fractured ground. The sound of helicopters overhead became a constant reminder of both danger and rescue, their blades chopping the smoky air as they carried supplies and evacuated the injured. Children struggled to sleep, flinching at every aftershock, while adults whispered fears of another, larger rupture still to come. Newsom's panic, though muted in official appearances, mirrored the private fears of millions who wondered whether the Earth would betray them again without warning. Economically, the rupture was catastrophic in ways that reached far beyond California's borders. The shutdown of Southern California's ports severed the arteries of international trade. Containers of electronics, clothing, and essential goods from across the Pacific sat idle, their unloading delayed indefinitely. Retailers across the country braced for shortages, and industries dependent on California's logistical networks faced looming shutdowns. For Newsom, the panic was not only about saving lives in the moment, but also about the recognition that California's calamity was rapidly becoming a national, even global crisis. One of the most harrowing aspects of the shutdown was the sudden isolation of communities. Desert towns on the fault line found themselves cut off as roads disintegrated. Mountain communities saw landslides triggered by the quake, further isolating them from aid. Newsom was briefed on areas where even helicopters struggled to land due to unstable terrain, and the frustration of knowing that some residents were unreachable weighed heavily on his decisions. The panic of leadership often stems not from ignorance but from knowledge, knowing what must be done but facing the reality that it cannot be achieved quickly enough. The rupture also ignited debates about the future of California's cities. Could Los Angeles, with its sprawling freeways and dense population, ever truly be safe? Was the gamble of living along the San Andreas worth the risks? These questions began to surface even as emergency crews still battled to stabilize the present. Newsom, caught in the maelstrom of immediate response, also carried the heavy awareness that the aftermath would bring scrutiny, criticism, and demands for answers. Yet in those critical hours, the priority was survival. Cultural life, so synonymous with Southern California, ground to a halt. Film productions shuttered, studios went dark, and the glamour of Hollywood was replaced by images of broken streets and shaken citizens. The global perception of California shifted overnight, from a land of sun and opportunity to a landscape of fragility and upheaval. Newsom's efforts to communicate resilience were undercut by the visible evidence of a state on its knees. His panic was not just personal but collective, as the identity of California itself seemed shaken by the rupture. In the broader American consciousness, the San Andreas rupture became a mirror reflecting the vulnerability of modern life. Southern California, often romanticized as a dreamland of beaches, stars, and innovation, now symbolized the limits of human control. Newsom's panic embodied the recognition that no leader, however skilled or charismatic, could fully command the forces of the earth. His task was not to control, but to guide, not to prevent panic entirely, but to channel it into collective action. The scientific community found itself both vindicated and overwhelmed. Decades of warnings about the big one had been realized, but the sheer scale of the rupture exceeded even their models. Newsom's interactions with seismologists were marked by frustration as he pressed for predictions that could not be given with certainty. The governor's panic was fueled by this void of knowledge. Science could explain what had happened, but it could not offer guarantees about what might happen next. That uncertainty became the backdrop of every decision made in those tense days. If you liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us, do you think California is prepared for a San Andreas Fault disaster? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching and see you next time.